I think here of Ernest Becker, who, I don't know how many of you know Ernest Becker, who wrote Denial of Death. Well, it's unfortunate there's just a couple of you. I think his book, Denial of Death, is biblical, if I could use that word, in the field of psychology. It's a grand thesis, and it makes a lot of sense to a number of people, including this recent terror management group that has come out of the Midwest, Sheldon Solomon and Greenberg and Brzezinski, who's written quite eloquently about what happens when we do deny death. That in experiments they've set up, they've shown that people actually become much more rigid in their thinking and black and white in their thinking when death anxiety is stimulated. And not only that, they're much more likely to gravitate toward militaristic and violent solutions to problems. You know, quick, cut and dried kind of solutions than people who are not stimulated by that death anxiety. But Becker had a very complex view of death. I mean, one of my concerns about the terror management theory is that maybe it highlights, again, the terror side and the constricting side. But Becker viewed death as a complex symbol, as he put it. So it certainly has that terror side. But like Rudolf Otto talks about in the idea of the holy, which Becker draws from, I draw from too. And in idea of the holy, he's talking about the primal religious experience, the experience before all the codes and the religious texts and so on, but just that basic sense of being, of life. That death or the great unknown has a fascinating element as well as a terrifying. He calls it the mysterium tremendum et fascinans, that it's both. And Becker certainly had this view. And when he was on his deathbed, it's a very poignant interview Sam Keane conducted it of Psychology Today. This was 1974. Keane asked him, you know, you've studied more about death or as much about death as anybody in the culture, and here, in effect, you're doing your empirical research, because he was dying right there of cancer right before Sam Keane. Just a couple of days later, he would actually die. And Sam asked him, so do you have any thoughts about this phenomenon? And Becker said, well, in effect, he said, I take solace that I'm giving myself over when there's nothing left to the tremendous creative energies of the cosmos, to be used for purposes we don't know. And to be used for purposes we don't know is one of the most exhilarating feelings a human being can experience. Now, that's quite a poignant line from somebody who's about to drift off into the great pastures. A couple of things about that line, giving himself over when there's nothing left. I love that line because for me it differentiates a kind of premature giving oneself over to the cosmic or the higher before one has really engaged questions about one's life and about life in general, and thereby maybe bypassing the great richness of our independent ability to discover things about life, to deal with life, to improve life. And it's also talking about an exhaustion point, which maybe some people who side with atheism and what you might call anthropocentrism, just the elevation of the human being to the highest point, don't often recognize that, there seem to be thresholds. If it seems wise to me for us to be humble about our situation. We aren't, you know, necessarily the be-all and end-all here. And I think Becker had a good sense of that, but he had a sense of it in a very balanced way. And in a way, what he's talking about highlights the value of both giving oneself over to the spiritual or religious experience of connection with being, and the need to use our critical resources as individuals.